Chapter 1. She's working without being employed. The first thing Archivist Soren Vale noticed about Earth was that nobody seemed to agree on when work ended. The shuttle descended through scattered clouds over the Pacific Northwest, banking gently as it approached the Cascadia Orbital Elevator Terminal. Below him stretched forests stitched together with rivers, towns, farms, and cities that blended into one another with surprising restraint. Solar fields shared valleys with orchards. Freight rail lines disappeared beneath parks. Wind turbines stood beyond fishing harbors where boats were already returning with the morning catch. Compact orientation materials had described Earth as economically mature. The description was technically correct. It was also spectacularly incomplete. Soren had spent 37 standard years studying labor allocation across 89 member civilizations of the Galactic Compact. Entire departments existed beneath the Historical Institute to understand how societies assigned work. Who grew food? Who maintained infrastructure? Who educated children? Who cared for the elderly? The answers were usually predictable: professionals, government agencies, licensed specialists, certified educators, machines whenever possible. Humanity followed those rules until quite suddenly it did not. A driver met him outside the terminal. She introduced herself with a broad smile. "I'm Lieutenant Mara Ellison, Human Commonwealth Cultural Exchange." Soren inclined his head. Archivist Soren Vale. "I know." Lifted his luggage as though it weighed nothing. "You packed books. I always pack books. I figured." The transport glided silently onto an elevated highway. Morning traffic flowed beneath towering evergreens still damp from an overnight rain. Soren watched cyclists commuting beside autonomous delivery vehicles. Children waited for school buses. Construction crews repaired a bridge. Everything appeared normal, until Mara pointed toward a neighborhood park. "You'll probably want to write about that." Soren looked. A gray-haired woman sat beneath a large maple tree. Around her, perhaps a dozen children, some painted. Others built elaborate towers from wooden blocks. One little girl climbed onto the woman's lap while another proudly held up a crooked drawing of what appeared to be a dinosaur wearing rain boots. Soren checked his tablet. Primary school? No. Childcare cooperative? No. Community education program? No. He looked back toward the park. Who supervises the children? The old lady. I can see that. Who employs her? Mara smiled. No one. He made his first note before they reached the city. Unlicensed childcare observed, no visible compensation, determine legal status. His temporary residence overlooked a quiet residential district known as Alder Ridge. Unlike Aurora Exchange, nothing operated continuously. People left for work in waves. The streets became quiet. Birds replaced traffic. Children disappeared into schools. Gardeners emerged. Mail carriers walked familiar routes. The entire neighborhood seemed to inhale, then exhale. His first scheduled interview began precisely at 1400. The Commonwealth had selected one individual as representative of what they described simply as a fairly typical grandmother. Soren immediately distrusted the phrase. Nothing about humanity had proven typical so far. The house sat on a tree-lined street where flowering vines climbed wooden fences. Its garden contained vegetables, herbs, fruit trees, and flowers growing together without obvious geometric order. Several raised beds had been built from reclaimed timber. A weathered wooden bench overlooked a small pond. Children's chalk drawings covered the front walkway. Someone had drawn planets. Someone else had added smiling ducks wearing space helmets. Soren found the combination unexpectedly pleasing. Before he reached the front door, a voice called from the garage. "If you're the alien, come around back." The garage doors stood open. Inside, chaos, organized chaos, workbench. Shelves of carefully labeled hardware. Woodworking tools polished from decades of use. Half-disassembled bicycles, a sewing machine, fishing rods, boxes labeled holiday lights, camping, school projects, and things that might still be useful. The last box appeared nearly full. An elderly woman tightened the final bolt on a child's bicycle. She wore faded work jeans, safety glasses pushed onto her forehead, and a blue flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled above her elbows. Silver hair escaped from a loose braid. Her movements lacked the speed of youth. They also lacked hesitation. Every tool seemed to arrive in her hand exactly when needed. Without looking up, she asked, "First time on Earth?" "Yes. You'll need coffee." Only after finishing the repair did she stand. "I'm Evelyn Mercer." She extended a grease-stained hand. Soren accepted it. "Archivist Soren Vale." "I know." She glanced toward the bicycle. "You mind holding this?" Before he could answer, she placed the bicycle into his hands. It weighed considerably more than expected. A boy of perhaps 8 years sprinted into the garage. "Grandma," his voice echoed through the workshop. "You fixed it. I told you I would." He hugged her without slowing down, then noticed Soren. His eyes widened. "Are you really from another planet?" Soren nodded. "I am." The boy considered this for almost 2 seconds. "Cool." Then he reclaimed the bicycle and pedaled down the driveway before anyone could stop him. Soren watched him disappear. "He did not thank you," Evelyn laughed. "He'll remember eventually. You repaired his vehicle without payment." "Yep, you invested approximately 43 minutes. "I did. For no economic return," she leaned against the workbench. "Depends how you calculate returns." Before Soren could ask, another knock sounded at the open garage. A teenage girl entered carrying a toaster. "Mrs. Mercer, counter." The girl set the appliance on the bench. It started making sparks. Evelyn removed the cover with practiced hands. "Homework finished? Almost." "Almost isn't yes," the girl sighed. "I'll finish after dinner." "Good." Evelyn nodded toward a bowl near the doorway. "Take 2 peaches home." The teenager obeyed without question. Soren blinked. "She is family?" "No. Neighbor, 3 houses over. You repair household appliances for your neighbors. When they ask." Another visitor arrived, an elderly man carrying a cardboard box. "Morning, Ev. You're late." "I know." He set the box on the bench. "Community garden finally had tomatoes." She took half, refused the rest. He insisted. She compromised by giving him homemade bread. Neither appeared to keep score. Soren's translator remained perfectly functional. The interaction still confused him. Nothing resembled commerce. Nothing resembled obligation. Everything resembled routine. His tablet chimed softly. He opened a new page, then stopped. None of his existing research categories fit. Not employment, not volunteer services, not family care, not community infrastructure. "What exactly do you do?" he finally asked. Evelyn looked genuinely surprised. She glanced around the garage. At the bicycles, the shelves, the half-repaired toaster, the tomatoes, the peaches, the empty coffee mugs, the chalk drawings outside. "I live here." "No," Soren frowned. "I mean your occupation." She thought for a moment. "I'm retired." He looked around the workshop again. "This is retirement." She laughed so hard she had to wipe tears from her eyes. "Oh, honey." She gestured toward the driveway where children laughed somewhere beyond the trees. "I'm busier now than I was when they paid me." The words lingered. Not because they were surprising, because she had said them so casually, as though everyone already knew. Soren had crossed 23 light years expecting to study retirement. Instead, he suspected he had stumbled onto an entire sector of human civilization that existed almost completely outside economics. And if that were true, then the human commonwealth had once again hidden one of its most important institutions in plain sight. This time, inside a grandmother's garage. Chapter 2, The Things You Can't Put in a Database. Archivist Soren Vale spent the next 5 days following Evelyn Mercer. Not continuously. That would have been impolite. Humans had informed him several times that observing someone through their kitchen window was considered deeply concerning. He adjusted his research methods accordingly. Instead, he accompanied Evelyn whenever she agreed to let him. He expected patterns, schedules, responsibilities. Instead, he found interruptions. Human civilization appeared remarkably comfortable being interrupted. Tuesday morning began with pancakes, not because anyone had planned pancakes, because Evelyn's granddaughter had called. "Grandma," a tiny voice echoed through the kitchen communicator. "Can Emma come over after school?" Evelyn stirred batter without looking up. "Of course. Her mom's meeting ran late. Tell her we'll have dinner waiting." The call ended. Soren looked up from his notes. "Your schedule has changed." "Yes." "You had other plans." "I did. You canceled them. I postponed them. Without compensation." Evelyn smiled over her shoulder. "You really like that word." Her kitchen overlooked the backyard. Morning sunlight filtered through pear trees. Birds landed on a weathered wooden fence whose paint had long ago surrendered to the Oregon rain. Copper pots hung above the stove. Every shelf seemed occupied. Old cookbooks, family photographs, small ceramic animals clearly made by children. A faded drawing labeled, "Grandma plus me." The proportions suggested the artist believed heads should occupy approximately half the human body. Evelyn had framed it. "You keep children's artwork." "Of course. It lacks artistic merit." She looked genuinely offended. "It has enormous artistic merit." Soren tried again. "It lacks technical quality." She turned the pancakes. "It was the first horse my granddaughter ever drew." He looked at the picture. "It resembles an overturned table." "It absolutely does," she smiled. "And someday she'll see it again." Only then did Soren understand. The drawing was not preserving the horse. It was preserving the child. His notebook gained another page. Humans archive emotional milestones alongside practical information. After breakfast, they walked 3 blocks to Alder Ridge Community Library. The building was modest. Brick walls, large windows, flower beds maintained by volunteers. Children's bicycles lined the entrance. Inside, 27 children occupied a reading circle. A librarian introduced Evelyn. "Our special guest." The children applauded. One little boy shouted, "Grandma Ev." Half the room echoed it. She was not their grandmother. Apparently that detail was optional. Evelyn opened a picture book. Instead of reading immediately, she asked a question. "What do you think this story is about?" Hands flew into the air. "A dragon. A dog. A dragon dog. A space dragon. A dragon that opens a bakery." The guesses became increasingly improbable. Soren waited for Evelyn to correct them. She never did. She simply nodded. "Interesting. Maybe. Let's find out." Afterward, he asked why she had allowed incorrect answers. Because they weren't wrong. The story was about a family of ducks. So, none of the children predicted ducks. They were practicing thinking. "They failed," she laughed. "No, they imagined." The distinction unsettled him. Compact education emphasized accuracy. Human childhood appeared to emphasize curiosity. The afternoon brought another interruption, a knock at the front door. A young father stood outside, holding an electric drill. "Evelyn, it died." She took the tool. "Battery? I think motor." She carried it into the garage. Within minutes, she had the casing open. The father watched carefully. "So that's why." She pointed toward a worn bearing. "See the scoring?" He nodded. "I would have just bought another one. You still might. But now you'll know why." Soren watched quietly. She was not fixing the drill. She was teaching the owner without announcing that she was teaching. Later, he asked her directly. "You explain every repair." "Usually." "Why?" She shrugged. "So maybe next time they won't need me." He stopped walking. "You are attempting to eliminate your own usefulness." She looked at him as though the answer were obvious. "That's kind of the job." The sentence refused to leave his mind. That evening, Emma arrived after school, 9 years old, missing one front tooth, carrying a backpack apparently heavier than she was. She dropped it beside the kitchen table. "Grandma, I hate fractions." Evelyn nodded sympathetically. "They'll pass." "No, they won't. They always do." Instead of explaining mathematics, Evelyn retrieved an apple pie from the counter. Within minutes, the pie had become circles, then halves, then quarters, then eighths. Soon, Emma was solving fraction problems with cinnamon-covered slices of pastry. By the time dessert disappeared, so had most of her frustration. Soren watched from across the table. "You changed the lesson." "I changed the language." Emma looked up. "Grandma always cheats." "I prefer creative instruction." After homework, the two disappeared into the garage. Soren followed. Evelyn handed Emma a tape measure. "How long is the bench?" Emma measured incorrectly. Evelyn did not correct her. "What happened?" Emma measured again. This time she noticed the hook on the tape had slipped. "Oh, it moves." "Why?" Evelyn smiled. "Good question," she demonstrated. "The hook is supposed to move. It compensates for its own thickness." Emma's eyes widened. "That's clever." "It is." Soren realized something. Evelyn had answered perhaps half the questions asked that day. The rest she had quietly returned. Every answer became another question. Every question became another discovery. That night he reviewed his recordings. Children asking questions, neighbors asking questions, adults asking questions. No one seemed embarrassed not to know something. Instead, not knowing appeared to be the beginning of the conversation. His translator highlighted a recurring phrase, "Let's figure it out." It appeared 23 times. Never once had Evelyn said, "Because I said so." The following morning, Soren found her kneeling beside a flower bed with Emma. "What are we planting?" he asked. Evelyn answered without looking up. "Patience." Emma giggled. "They're tomatoes." Evelyn winked. "They're both." The seeds disappeared beneath dark soil. Emma watered them, then immediately asked, "When do they grow?" "In about 2 months." Emma frowned. "That's forever." "It feels like it." "What do we do until then?" Evelyn stood, brushing dirt from her gloves. "We come back tomorrow." Soren watched the child nod seriously. No lecture. No speech about delayed gratification, no educational presentation, just tomorrow. That afternoon, he updated his report to the Historical Institute. He deleted the heading. "Retirement behaviors," he replaced it with "informal civilization maintenance." Then he wrote, "Human grandparents do not merely provide childcare. They reduce the educational burden on parents. They preserve practical skills without formal classrooms. They reinforce cultural identity through ordinary conversation. They create community resilience without government direction. Most remarkably, they accomplish all of this while insisting they are just helping." He stared at the final sentence. For the first time since arriving on Earth, he wondered whether humanity's greatest institutions were not the ones with buildings. Perhaps they were the ones that did not realize they were institutions at all. Chapter 3. The Stories That Don't Appear in History Books. Archivist Soren Vale had interviewed admirals, heads of government, chief engineers, Nobel laureates, corporate founders. Every one of them could explain what they had accomplished. None of them had ever begun with "my grandmother." He had started noticing the pattern almost by accident. Now he could no longer ignore it. It began during a visit to Cascadia Structural Systems, one of Earth's largest bridge engineering firms. The company's chief designer, Dr. Adrian Kessler, stood before a scale model of a suspension bridge spanning nearly 3 kilometers. The load distribution algorithm was inspired by fungal growth patterns, he explained. The material selection came from lunar construction research, Soren nodded. And who first taught you to use tools? The engineer blinked. My grandmother, Soren paused. Professionally? No, she restored antique furniture. What relevance did that have? Adrian smiled. She wouldn't let me use a power tool until I could sharpen a hand plane. Why, she said machines forgive sloppy thinking. He laughed quietly. I was annoyed at the time. He rested a hand on the bridge model. I've been grateful ever since. That afternoon, Soren interviewed a trauma surgeon. Dr. Nadia Alvarez had performed more than 6,000 emergency operations. What inspired you to enter medicine? My grandmother. Soren stopped writing. What was her profession? School cook. She wasn't a physician. No. Then why? Nadia looked toward the hospital window. When I was 7, I scraped my knee. I thought it was the end of the world. Grandma washed it, put on a bandage, gave me soup. Then she told me people heal better when someone stays with them. The surgeon looked back toward Soren. I've been trying to prove her right ever since. By the end of the week, his notes contained 17 interviews. 14 began with grandparents. The remaining 3 began with parents quoting grandparents. He returned to Evelyn's house, carrying a growing sense of professional frustration. This is statistically impossible. She looked up from shelling peas on the back porch. What is? I have interviewed leaders from multiple professions. Excellent. Nearly all attribute foundational life lessons to grandparents. Sounds about right. No, he sat across from her. It does not. She slid a bowl toward him. Help, he looked inside. Peas, hundreds of them. I don't know how. Perfect, she showed him. Pinch, pull, drop. Simple. Within minutes, the work became almost automatic. Only then did she answer. When your parents are raising you, they're busy. Jobs, bills, schedules, homework, keeping everybody alive. She dropped another handful into the bowl. Grandparents usually have something different. What time? The word lingered. Soren had expected wisdom, experience, knowledge. Instead, she had answered with time. Surely professionals possess time, she laughed. Have you met any? He admitted he had not. That evening, Sunday arrived. Evelyn's house transformed. Cars filled the driveway. Children ran through the backyard. Someone grilled vegetables. Someone else baked bread. Music drifted from an old speaker on the porch. The smell of garlic, rosemary, and roasted chicken filled the neighborhood. Soren counted 23 people, 3 generations, perhaps 4. He was not entirely certain. Human family trees appeared considerably more complicated than biological diagrams suggested. Nobody seemed assigned to anything, yet everything happened. The table expanded. Extra chairs appeared. Children somehow knew where to find games. Teenagers carried dishes without being asked. Older adults quietly washed vegetables while arguing cheerfully about whether tomatoes belonged in fruit salad. Soren leaned toward Evelyn. Who organized this? She looked genuinely confused. What do you mean? This gathering? We did. No. Who is responsible? She looked around the yard. Everyone. A little girl climbed into Evelyn's lap carrying a picture book. Grandma. One story. What? Evelyn looked toward the kitchen. Dinner's in 15 minutes. One short story. The little girl held up one finger. Please. Evelyn opened the book. Within moments, 7 children had gathered, then 12, then adults, not because they needed the story, because they wanted to hear Evelyn tell it. She did not simply read. She performed, different voices, different expressions, pauses exactly where suspense belonged. The children gasped. The adults laughed before the children understood the jokes. Apparently, they had heard the story dozens of times. They still enjoyed it. Afterward, the youngest grandchild asked, Grandma, did Grandpa really fall into the lake? The adults immediately began laughing. He absolutely did. No, I didn't. A gray-haired man looked up from the barbecue. I slipped. You slipped, Evelyn agreed, into the lake. It was raining. It wasn't. It felt like it. Soon everyone contributed. The story changed. New details appeared. Old ones were corrected. Somebody produced photographs. Someone else remembered something even funnier. Children laughed until tears rolled down their cheeks. Soren quietly recorded the conversation, not because of the lake, because of what happened around it. No one argued over precise accuracy. The purpose was not historical documentation. The purpose was remembering together. Later, as dusk settled across Alder Ridge, Soren found Evelyn alone on the back porch. Children chased fireflies across the lawn. Adults cleaned dishes while pretending not to notice teenagers stealing dessert. The old engineer sipped tea from a chipped ceramic mug. May I ask something personal? You've been asking personal questions all week. He nodded. Fair. You've taught engineering, cooking, gardening, woodworking, patience, fractions, repair, history, reading, community responsibility. She listened quietly. Who taught you? For the first time since meeting her, Evelyn did not answer immediately. She looked toward the old pear tree. Its branches stretched over the yard where children now played beneath lights someone had quietly hung between the trunks years ago. My grandfather, Soren waited. He fixed farm equipment. He never finished school, but he could look at a broken machine and somehow hear what it needed. She smiled softly. I thought he was magic. Were his methods documented? No. Published? No. Recorded? She shook her head. They were recorded. She tapped her chest. Right here. Soren felt something shift. For weeks he had been searching for humanity's archive. He had assumed it would be a building, a database, a museum, a government repository. Instead, he was beginning to suspect part of it walked around in ordinary people. Invisible, living, changing slightly every time it was shared. That night he opened his journal. For several minutes he simply stared at the page. Finally he wrote, Human grandparents are not repositories of information. Libraries already perform that function. They are repositories of judgment. They remember not merely what happened, but what mattered. And each generation quietly edits that wisdom before handing it to the next. He stopped writing. Outside, he could hear Evelyn laughing with her family. The sound carried easily through the open window. Warm, ordinary, entirely forgettable, unless one day it was not there anymore. Chapter 4, the day the school closed. The storm arrived on a Thursday. Not dramatic enough for headlines, not dangerous enough to become a disaster, just persistent rain, heavy wind. One fallen transmission tower north of the city. By 7:30 that morning, half of Alder Ridge had lost power. Schools delayed opening. Traffic lights switched to flashing emergency mode. Internet service became unreliable. Coffee shops filled with unexpected customers carrying laptops that no longer connected to anything. The neighborhood slowed. Human civilization, Soren noticed, did not stop. It simply changed shape. His apartment lost electricity shortly after breakfast. The heating system shut down, the elevator stopped. Emergency lighting quietly illuminated the hallway. Soren activated his travel battery. His room remained perfectly functional. Outside, nothing appeared functional. His communicator chimed. A message from Evelyn, power's out, come over if you're cold, bring your notebook. He arrived to find the house already full. Not crowded, purposeful. Children occupied the dining room, drawing pictures by the windows where natural light remained strongest. Two neighbors prepared soup in the kitchen using a gas stove. Someone carried extra blankets upstairs. A teenager stacked firewood beside the fireplace. Nobody appeared to be waiting for instructions. Soren looked around. Who organized this? Evelyn glanced up from a pot simmering on the stove. No one. That cannot be correct. It usually isn't, she smiled. But today it is. Another knock sounded. A young mother entered carrying a sleeping infant. I'm sorry, our furnace quit. Guest room, Evelyn answered without hesitation. Fresh sheets are already on the bed. The woman blinked. You already made it. I figured someone would need it. She had. Soren made another note. Humans prepare for people they do not yet know will need help. The front door opened again. This time a familiar face, Emma, still wearing her school backpack, still wearing her raincoat. Completely soaked. School closed. She announced the fact as though it were simultaneously wonderful and tragic. Behind her came 8 more children, then 3 parents, then 2 teachers. Soren looked toward Evelyn. You expected this, she shrugged. I bought extra bread yesterday. Because of the weather? No, she smiled. Because somebody always gets hungry. The teachers attempted to apologize. We didn't want to impose. Evelyn waved them toward the kitchen. Good. Then don't. Within 20 minutes, the dining room had become a classroom. Not officially, simply naturally. One teacher worked through mathematics with several children. Another read aloud from a novel. Older students quietly helped younger ones. Nobody discussed educational policy. Nobody requested authorization. Nobody waited for government guidance. People simply noticed children needed somewhere to be, then made somewhere. Soren watched with growing fascination. This was not planned. No. Evelyn handed him another cutting board. Slice carrots. I am conducting research. Excellent. She placed a knife in his hand. Research the carrots. He found himself chopping vegetables beside 3 retirees discussing local history. One had once managed a shipping company. Another had repaired aircraft. The third had spent 40 years as an elementary school teacher. Now all 3 debated the proper amount of garlic for vegetable soup, with surprising intensity. By midday, the house contained 32 people. Someone had started baking bread. Someone else repaired flashlights. A teenager shoveled fallen branches from elderly neighbors' driveways. 3 children built an elaborate cardboard city across the living room floor. The infant slept peacefully upstairs. Nothing about the gathering resembled emergency management. It resembled family, expanded until it included whoever happened to need it. Soren wandered into the garage. He found Noah Mercer, Evelyn's son, repairing a portable generator. Metal parts lay neatly arranged across the workbench. He looked up briefly, mourning. "You are an engineer. Electrical. You inherited your profession from your mother?" Noah laughed. "Mom tried very hard not to influence me. Did she succeed?" "No," he tightened another bolt. "When I was 12, I broke the lawn mower. I thought she'd yell. 'What happened?' She handed me the owner's manual. And she said, 'If you can break it, you can probably learn to fix it.'" Soren wrote the sentence immediately. Noah continued. "I spent 2 days figuring it out. She knew how to repair it the entire time." "Why didn't she?" "Because she wanted me to know I could." The generator started on the first pull. Later that afternoon, the power company estimated restoration by midnight. No one complained. Instead, people checked on the few neighbors who still had not appeared. One elderly widower lived alone. 2 teenagers carried meals to his house. A young couple whose refrigerator had failed distributed food before it spoiled. Someone organized board games for children. Another neighbor charged medical equipment from Noah's repaired generator. Soren noticed something peculiar. No central authority coordinated any of it. No neighborhood committee issued assignments. No algorithm optimized resource allocation. The network already existed, invisible, waiting. He found Evelyn watching rain strike the backyard through to see the connection. "I've lived through enough storms," she nodded toward the busy house. "You eventually stop asking who's going to help. You start asking, what can I do before they ask?" The distinction settled heavily in Soren's thoughts. That evening the lights returned. One house, then another. Then the entire neighborhood glowed back to life. Children cheered, adults applauded sarcastically toward the ceiling, coffee makers beeped, internet routers blinked awake. The emergency had ended. People gathered coats, collected dishes, thanked Evelyn, promised to return the borrowed blankets. Children hugged one another goodbye as though the unexpected school day had been a holiday. Within 30 minutes the house became quiet again. Soren remained at the kitchen table. Only he and Evelyn were left. The dishes were done. The soup pot sat empty. Rain tapped softly against the windows. "You never seemed worried." "Oh, I was." "You concealed it well," she smiled. "That's another thing grandparents learn." "What?" "The little ones are always watching. If I panic, they'll remember the panic. If I stay calm, they might remember that instead." Soren looked around the now silent house. He thought about the engineer who had learned confidence by fixing a lawn mower. The teachers who had instinctively turned a dining room into a classroom, the retirees arguing over soup, the guest room prepared before anyone asked, the child who had arrived frightened and left laughing. He opened his journal. For a long time he searched for the right words. Finally he wrote, "Professional institutions solve emergencies. Human grandparents prevent emergencies from becoming frightening. Their greatest contribution is not knowledge, it is emotional stability. They lend calm to people who have not yet learned how to create it themselves." He closed the journal. Outside, the neighborhood looked exactly as it had the day before. Lights glowed. Families ate dinner. Children prepared for school. Nothing about Alder Ridge appeared extraordinary, which Soren was beginning to understand was exactly what made it extraordinary. Chapter 5, The Empty Chair. 24 years passed. Archivist Soren Vale remained in contact with the Mercer family. Officially, the relationship continued as a longitudinal cultural study. Unofficially, he received birthday invitations, holiday cards, occasional messages that simply read, "Emma graduated, Noah finally retired. The tomatoes were terrible this year." Human correspondence, Soren had discovered, rarely limited itself to matters of obvious importance. He had eventually stopped asking why. His reports became required reading throughout the compact. The phrase grandparent effect entered academic literature. Researchers attempted to quantify it. Hours spent mentoring, skills transferred, educational outcomes, community resilience, volunteer labor, economic value. Entire conferences debated the numbers. Soren quietly suspected they were measuring the wrong thing. When he next returned to Earth, Alder Ridge looked almost unchanged. The pear trees were taller. The library had been expanded. Children who had once raced bicycles through the neighborhood now arrived pushing strollers of their own. Time had moved. The neighborhood had simply welcomed it. He walked toward Evelyn's house. The workshop door stood open, exactly as it always had. The shelves remained full. The workbench remained worn smooth by decades of use. The old box still sat on the highest shelf, things that might still be useful. He smiled. Some things apparently never changed, others had. The chair beside the workbench was empty. No footsteps crossed the driveway, no cheerful voice called from the garage, no kettle whistled inside the kitchen. The house felt full and incomplete. Noah found him standing quietly in the workshop. "You made it." "I did." They embraced in the slightly awkward manner of two people from cultures with different expectations regarding physical affection. Years earlier, Soren would have considered the gesture unnecessary. Now he found it reassuring. "I'm sorry," Noah nodded. "So are we." Neither spoke for a while. Silence did not feel uncomfortable. Human families, Soren had learned, did not rush silence. Sometimes it was simply another way of remembering. The funeral had taken place 3 days earlier. Evelyn had lived to 94. She had remained in her own home until the end, still repairing bicycles, still growing tomatoes, still answering questions. According to Emma, her final conversation had been about why birds tilted their heads when listening. "It seems appropriate," Soren said quietly. Emma laughed through damp eyes. "It really does." The family gathered that evening, not because anyone had scheduled it, because it was Sunday. The dining room table expanded once again. Extra chairs appeared. Children chased one another through the backyard. Someone grilled vegetables, someone baked bread. Music drifted from the porch. The same rituals, the same house, one unmistakable absence. Soren noticed something remarkable. No one avoided talking about Evelyn, quite the opposite. Every conversation eventually reached her. "Grandma always kept extra blankets. Remember when she fixed my bike? She taught me how to sharpen chisels. She never let anyone leave hungry. She could identify birds just from the sound. She cheated at cards." "I absolutely did not," Emma answered automatically, then stopped. Everyone looked at her. For one heartbeat, the room became quiet, then laughter rolled across the table. "You sounded exactly like her," Noah said. Emma blinked. "I did. You even crossed your arms." She looked down. Without realizing it, she had. Soren watched carefully. No one had taught Emma to imitate Evelyn. She simply had. Thousands of tiny habits, phrases, expressions, ways of laughing, ways of solving problems. They had migrated from one generation into another so gradually that no one noticed until the original voice had fallen silent. After dinner, the youngest child wandered into the workshop. Perhaps 6 years old. He picked up an old measuring tape from the bench. "Mom," Emma looked over. "How do you use this?" She smiled, took the tape, extended it, then deliberately hooked the end incorrectly. "What happened?" she asked. The little boy frowned, measured again, noticed the loose hook. "Oh, it moves." "Why?" Emma laughed. "Good question." Soren froze. He had heard those exact words decades earlier, not memorized, lived. He quietly opened his notebook, then closed it again. No written description would capture what he had just witnessed. Knowledge had not been transmitted, identity had. Later that night, Emma found him sitting alone beneath the old pear tree. The backyard lights cast soft pools of gold across the grass. Children's laughter drifted through open windows. "You look sad." "I am," she nodded. "So are we." "I also believe," he said carefully, "that your grandmother is still teaching." Emma looked toward the workshop. "I think she'd like hearing that." Soren shook his head gently. "No," he pointed toward the dining room, toward Noah patiently helping a grandchild tie a fishing knot, toward another cousin showing children how to knead bread, toward Emma explaining the measuring tape, toward neighbors washing dishes without being asked. "I don't believe she would need to hear it." "Why?" "Because," he said with a soft smile, "she already succeeded." That night, he revised the final chapter of his research. For years, he had written that grandparents preserved wisdom. Now he crossed out the sentence. He replaced it with another. Human grandparents do not preserve wisdom. They distribute it so completely that, when they are finally gone, no one can remember where it originally lived. It survives because it no longer belongs to them. It belongs to the family. As he closed the journal, a little girl ran across the yard. She stopped beside the empty workshop, looked toward Emma, then asked a question that made every adult smile. "Grandma?" No one corrected her, not because she was confused, because in that moment she was not. Chapter 6, The Profession with No Title. 5 years after Evelyn Mercer's funeral, the Galactic Compact quietly began making a mistake. It was an intelligent mistake, the kind only intelligent civilizations make. The Ministry of Social Development reviewed archivist Soren Vale's research. The conclusions were difficult to ignore. Children who regularly spent time with grandparents demonstrated stronger emotional regulation. Apprenticeships succeeded more often. Neighborhood volunteer rates increased. Young adults reported lower rates of isolation. Community recovery after disasters improved. The numbers were remarkably consistent. The solution seemed obvious: create the institution. Across 31 member worlds, the Compact established its first senior knowledge initiative. Retired engineers would mentor engineering students. Retired physicians would mentor medical interns. Former judges would advise law schools. Scientists would visit classrooms. Artisans would teach apprentices. Everything would be organized, certified, scheduled, measured, evaluated. For the first year, the program worked. Attendance remained excellent. Educational outcomes improved. Graduation rates increased. Government reports celebrated the initiative as a tremendous success. Then nothing else happened. Volunteer rates remained unchanged. Neighborhood resilience did not improve. Communities remained just as disconnected. Children learned skills. They rarely formed lasting relationships. The statistics that had inspired the program refused to appear. The ministry summoned Soren. Minister Lyron Voss greeted him inside a conference room overlooking the Capitol. "We implemented your recommendations." "No," Soren answered gently. "You implemented what you thought my recommendations were." The minister frowned. "The data is excellent." "It is." "Then why are you dissatisfied?" "Because," Soren said, looking across the city below, "you copied the lesson. You missed the teacher." Silence settled across the room. "The distinction escapes me." "I know." Soren opened one of his oldest journals. The leather cover had faded after decades of travel. Inside, pressed between two pages, lay a child's drawing, a horse, or perhaps an overturned table. Minister Voss stared. "What is that?" "The first horse a little girl ever drew." "Why are you carrying it?" "Because her grandmother did." The minister waited. Soren smiled. "Exactly." Several weeks later, he returned to Earth, not to conduct research, simply to visit. Emma now occupied the workshop, not permanently. The space belonged to everyone, exactly as Evelyn had intended. The shelves had grown fuller. New boxes appeared, camping gear, science fair projects, Halloween costumes. One familiar box still occupied the highest shelf, things that might still be useful. Apparently no one possessed the courage to throw it away. Children filled the garage. One repaired a skateboard. Another painted a birdhouse. A teenager struggled with a bicycle chain. Emma moved quietly between them, rarely solving problems, mostly asking questions. Soren smiled. She caught him watching. "What? You've started doing it." "Doing what?" he answered with perfect imitation of Evelyn's voice. "Good question," Emma laughed. "I have, haven't I? You don't even notice anymore." "No," she looked around the garage. "I guess I don't." A little boy raised his hand. "Grandma," Emma looked over automatically. "My bridge keeps falling over." She walked toward him, studied the tiny wooden structure, then stepped back. "What do you think it's trying to tell you?" Soren laughed, not loudly, just enough for Emma to hear. "That one wasn't your grandmother," she grinned. "No, that was my grandfather." The realization delighted him. He had spent years believing wisdom flowed in one direction. Instead, it merged. Grandmothers, grandfathers, parents, neighbors, teachers, friends, each adding something, each quietly disappearing into the next generation. Before leaving, Soren visited the old pear tree. It had become enormous. Its branches shaded nearly the entire backyard. Children climbed the lower limbs while adults pretended not to notice. Someone had hung a wooden swing from one sturdy branch. It creaked gently in the afternoon breeze. A small bronze plaque rested beneath the trunk. Simple, unadorned, no long speech, no impressive titles. It read only, "Evelyn Mercer." She always had time for one more question. Soren stood there for a long while. Eventually, Emma joined him. "You know," she said quietly, "people keep asking us how Grandma managed to teach so many people." "What do you tell them?" Emma looked toward the workshop, toward the children, toward the open garage, toward neighbors walking in without knocking. "I tell them," she said with a smile, "she never thought she was teaching." Years later, the Compact quietly dissolved the Senior Knowledge Initiative, not because it had failed, because it had been asking the wrong question. In its place, a new movement emerged: neighborhood workshops, community gardens, shared kitchens, story nights, repair cafes, intergenerational housing. Reading circles, places where old and young simply spent time together. No curriculum, no examinations, no productivity metrics, only relationships. The knowledge followed naturally. Human Archive entry 7544.9, grandparents. We believe civilizations preserved themselves with archives. Humanity preserved itself with conversations. We believed wisdom required institutions. Humanity proved it also required kitchens, workshops, gardens, front porches, dining room tables. We tried to recreate the human grandparent by assigning retired experts to teach. We produced excellent teachers. We did not produce grandparents, for a grandparent is not defined by age, nor by biology, nor by expertise. They are defined by a single extraordinary decision. They choose to spend something no civilization can manufacture. Time, freely, patiently, again and again. until another generation no longer remembers where its wisdom came from. We searched for humanity's oldest libraries. We should have searched for the oldest person still answering a child's endless questions, because books preserve information. Grandparents preserve civilization.